the idea that going and getting 1,000 leads is hard. It's not. You have money, you want to go and get them, that's great. What's actually hard is creating qualified opportunities that convert to revenue at an acceptable customer acquisition cost that your sales team wants. And that's the hard part.
Yeah. On this episode of Brews BizDev, our illustrious guest is Chris Walker of Refine Labs. And while I drink some high-end bourbon by myself, Chris talks a little bit about the difference between demand gen and lead gen. He shares what he might have done differently as he went from being in a business by himself to growing a 15-plus person organization, and also tells a great and exclusive story about a time he took a dead-in-the-water press release and turned it into a massively high-performing blog. Great illustration on the difference between information and communication. So thanks for watching. Please, if you like what you see and like what you hear, then subscribe and share and enjoy. Hey, Chris, thanks for coming on, bud. How's it going?
Hey, Paul, great to see you again. I see that you got some Basil Hayden's there. Got my orange juice, and we're going to cruise right through here. Talk about some demand gen.
Yes. Yes. First episode, I get to drink by myself, which is a sign of something.
I really hate to be that guy, but we got a live session, and I gotta make sure that at 7:30 I'm not drunk, and so I can actually go live and get stuff done.
I didn't realize till right before this. I'm thinking like, when I got your email, I'm like, oh wait, that's tonight. Oh, it's Tuesday. Oh shit. Okay, cool. So yeah, while I crack open my new bourbon and prepare to drink by myself, why don't you just go ahead and give your elevator pitch and introduce yourself to the viewers?
Yeah. Hey everyone. No elevator pitch here, but my name's Chris Walker. In general, I'm just a practical, classically trained marketer that thinks about things in an interesting way, and has been able to, both inside of companies that I worked for in the past, as well as companies that I've built, whether that's e-commerce or the consulting firm that I'm building right now, have just been able to figure out a way to communicate with potential people that might buy our products and things in a way that creates affinity to what we do, which I think is like the simplest way to describe demand gen, which is what we're going to be diving into detail today. And so that's what I do.
Nice. And
just for people that know, I started a company called Refine Labs we're coming up on 2 years now, believe it or not. So started this by myself. We have rapidly grown. We serve and help companies transform their B2B demand generation programs, primarily sales-led SaaS.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And yeah, so you hit it there for a second. So demand gen. We live in a world of a lot of language, a lot of terms that get old real quick, and a lot of terms that mean something different to every single person that you talk to about it. And if you search it, I've seen, I don't know how many definitions. So why don't you just dig in a little more with what is, demand gen versus marketing? What does demand gen mean to you? And what are you talking about when you say it?
Yeah, so I'm going to try and, it's a loaded question, so I'm going to try and get stuff done for some people. So, I think when most people think about demand gen, I think about it differently. I think most companies that are operating what they consider demand gen is actually lead generation, or what I would consider contact acquisition. Mm-hmm. Just getting contact information to pass to a sales team, I think, is what's happening as I scan across the market. And then I thought about this. I was actually talking with someone recently, and I thought about, okay, so they asked me, why is it happening this way? And I actually thought back. And so I'll give it to people. 20 years ago, these B2B companies were 100% sales driven. Mm-hmm. And no fault to them. It was the best way to go to market, right? You didn't have the ability to target people on the internet. The only way you could reach them is to build some booth at a conference that they, seemed and hoped that they stumbled by your booth, mm-hmm. or to do outbound sales. And so a lot of companies did outbound sales and had a lot of success with that. And over the past 20 years, the landscape has changed. And so as that evolved, they moved into predictable revenue and an SDR model. And then at the same time, marketing automation was starting, and marketing's ability to create contacts in a cost-effective, scalable way was continuing to grow. And so basically, because the companies had this sales mindset deeply entrenched, what they've done is they've created a marketing function that looks very closely to what an SDR function would look like. Mm-hmm. When you look at demand gen is basically like using traditional, or what people would think about as marketing channels, to do sales dev work, And that's not exactly the way that I see it, at least not the way that I see it operating most effectively based on when we change company strategy to a different way and see the positive impact on what those changes do. And so when I think about demand gen, I think about the idea of when you are doing demand, you are actually scored on pipeline and revenue generation that comes through your website or however else you want to measure it. Mm-hmm. And so you are generating opportunities as if you were a sales dev team. So it's tough because there's some confusion here. And as you peel back the layers, you start to help people understand. However, when I'm executing demand, I do not have intent to convert someone into a customer right now. And I think that is the number one distinction. Sales does. Sales wants that now. Yeah. I think marketing's ability to focus on what the customer needs and let the customer decide when they decide is one of the major things about what's different. And people are going to listen to this and be like, what the hell is this guy talking about? He's going to come in here and, do stuff that's fluffy. And then we're not going to have any people coming to us to have meetings and blah, 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 blah. Yeah. But the thing is, and I've been very loud about this recently, is when you do the right thing for people, you get better short-term results. When you think long-term, you actually get better results in the short term too. And when people think about we need short-term lift, what they actually get is let's figure out how to light up the top of the funnel and create metrics that make us feel like we're doing a lot and actually don't materialize to anything tangible for the business. Mm-hmm. That's what's happening a lot. You can watch, you see 30,000 leads just come in as a lead, go to SAL, get recycled, go into marketing automation, come back because they hit an MQL score and just cycle around at the top of the funnel because it's just a bunch of infrastructure that's been created that doesn't actually move the needle. And so I see that a lot. And so what I've done is recognized how bad that is and how much wasted effort and time and cost, both on the marketing and the sales side, are happening. And I just say, forget that. Let's just stop doing that. Let's let sales do things that are actually effective. Let's let sales dev focus on creating content or going outbound to our top accounts or, inviting people to events or whatever they want to do. Mm-hmm. And let's have marketing focused on educating the market, creating brand awareness, creating product consideration, creating problem awareness. I think a lot of companies, a lot of buyers out there, companies believe that everyone wants their thing, but in the reality of the market, most people don't even know the problem that exists that they solve. Yeah, educating people on those types of things is really important. And the way that you're able to educate people on those things is to remove the intent of sales and focus on what's best for them. And so to me, this ultimately comes back to intent. When the intent is to sell something, you actually drive a lot of the wrong behaviors, which ironically gets you the wrong result as well. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I know there's a flip side to the intent conversation too, right? Where what you're looking to measure, and you mentioned it there, is what you deliver to whom depends on what their intent is at the moment. Right. So leads, for example, look, we're generating all these leads because we're getting measured. I mean, we're getting paid because of how companies are structured and how they're incentivizing. Mm-hmm. We are paid to generate leads.
Yep. And by the way, sorry to interrupt you, but just by the way, I could go to any of the 25 SaaS companies that we work for right now, change one thing about how we're running ads and light up their dashboard with leads that don't matter. It is a commodity action that doesn't actually generate business results. And it's, to be honest, what most companies do right now.
Yes.
And so the idea that going and getting 1,000 leads is hard, it's not. You have money, you want to go and get them, that's great. What's actually hard is creating qualified opportunities that convert to revenue at an acceptable customer acquisition cost that your sales team wants. And that's the hard part.
Yeah. Yeah. Information for people who have an intention to explore, if not actively buy what you're doing, versus people who just wanted something that you were offering, and then you're going to harass the hell out of them with your sales team and wonder why it doesn't convert, right?
Yeah.
So,
until the mindset is shifted away from predictable revenue, high volume leads, and then let's churn through the phones with low cost, low skilled, to be frank, employees in order to find a couple meetings for our sales reps, and most of those meetings no show anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, then let's dig into, you mentioned problem awareness that's missing often in what people are putting out. So let's do problem awareness for what you're doing, right? And what your message is. So how do people who, like, what is the problem that people are experiencing that what you're talking about, actually what points to? How does someone know that they have a problem if they assume that this is just how marketing is done? What can they look at? What are the measures maybe? Are they like looking at the wrong metrics? How do people know that they have a problem with their demand gen and marketing?
Yeah. So I want to elevate this so that it's helpful for people. And so to think about how you educate your buyer on a problem. And so the first step is you need to have a ridiculously deep understanding of what their world looks like. The reason that I'm able to create content that resonates and generate business off of it is because when I say things like your lead to customer rate is 0.1% on content syndication, and they look in the CRM and they're like, yeah, it's 0.09% actually, because it's true. And because I've seen it across so many companies, it's like visceral, like it's so specific. And so I think a lot of companies, your revenue growth is too slow. The problems are so broad. The details are non-existent, and no wonder it doesn't resonate with the audience. And so for people that want to help get their types of people, whoever they're trying to go after, to understand this, you need to understand them deeply first, and then consider something to bring value. And so a couple of the indicators that I would see is you can feel internally that you don't have a clear, consistent roadmap for how to execute demand. I call it getting stuck on the MQL hamster wheel, just spinning your wheels, creating contacts and not actually going anywhere. You're just revolving around in a circle. I think a lot of people, when I say that, are like, shit, that's me. So that's one step. The next one that I look at is lead to customer ratio. And so anyone can go into their CRM and say, how many leads did I get? Not even SALs, raw leads. And how many of those raw leads became customers? And I almost never see a rate greater than 2%, but often it's going to be 0.3, 0.2%.
Yeah.
And when that happens, when you recognize that the problem that's happening there is actually on all of the sales resources needed to follow up with that garbage, if you can connect the dots on that one, then you realize that you want to have a better version. So I'm looking anything less than 1%, and it's just like you're creating a lot of low intent leads to create metrics. So that's another one. Another one just comes into tactics. It's like, what are you actually doing? So gated ebook is a gateway to the contacts that create the less than 1% lead to customer rate. And so gated ebooks is a big one for me, whether that comes through LinkedIn, organic on a website, paid search. There's a ton of different ways to get someone to download third-party content syndication. There's a ton of different ways to do that. Yeah. And then I think the last one is that like over the past, since whatever the lockdown quarantine started, it's almost been a year now. The importance of marketing execution has the visibility to that internally has been raised a lot, because historically a lot of marketing teams could suck and sales, adds more resources and can carry the weight to an extent. And that, type of pressure created by the situation is, making that harder. And so marketing has to carry more. The visibility to their actual impact is getting higher. And so if you don't have confidence in hitting those targets, you have to decide whether the targets are realistic or not. And a lot of companies come to me to tell them whether or not it's realistic. And then from there, you kind of have an insight about whether or not you have confidence in your marketing moving forward. I think those are some of the things.
Okay. And I know I've heard you talk before about one of the simplest ones that I think even maps onto kind of smaller businesses, traditional businesses that sometimes are just getting into, maybe even for the pandemic reasons, are like, oh shit, marketing online, like let's figure this out. And they've been running on, businesses I used to consult with, right? They're running on cost per lead. running on two metrics sometimes, revenue,
cost per lead, and
then
number
cost
of,
per lead. And
Yeah.
it's like, hey, here's the only two things. And I know you've mentioned, I mean, you threw out some right there, but also even better than that, right, is like the total cost to acquire a customer. Like the total CAC is at least, once you factor in sales and all the time that the people have wasted with shitty leads and converting people and automating emails that are just getting ignored, that's a better metric than that. So for the very, very simple business who sometimes is figuring out these metrics for the first time, are there any like real low level kind of metrics that they can look at that are at least better than revenue and cost per lead, and besides the one I just threw out?
Yeah. So for small businesses, I think I've figured this out, and I was doing it in 2015, which is how I got these insights, and then I've continued to evolve on it. Is that you need to look at the qualitative. And so if you are a business owner and you have a business that is 20 people, and let's just say it's a Series A SaaS company, and your marketing team's doing stuff, and you have SDRs and you have salespeople, as the CEO, I think that you should go out and call 10 leads from a certain source. And then you will know what it's like for those people, and you will know very clearly whether or not those leads are good.
Yeah.
And so like, that's what I did. The reason that I noticed that all leads aren't created equal is two things. The first one was qualitative, and then I backed it up with quantitative. Qualitative, I generated leads from a lot of different sources. I didn't pass them to SDRs, I called them. And then once I called them, I routed them to E's when they're good. And I recognized the ebook download, rarely answered the phone and didn't want to hear from me. And I recognized that the demo request answered right away and was pumped to set up that meeting with our sales rep for next Thursday.
Yeah.
And I did that in a ton of different ways and channels, and started to find consistencies. And the next thing I did is I took all of our data from a year, and I looked at all of it based on source and whether or not they became customers. And I started to segment and look. And I was like, okay, these lead sources never become customers. These lead sources have super long sales cycles. These lead sources close super fast at the right deal size. Our reps are pumped because I'm getting feedback and say, hey, I just closed that deal in 30 days. Normally it takes me 180 to get this stuff done.
Yeah.
And so again, I think in when companies have become so systemized across quantitative metrics, and the qualitative information that tells them the story is right in front of them.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and that's I think it's a great point. And for even smaller than small businesses, and no matter what the field, because one of the things, and understandably so, as businesses grow, as you add more systems, we hear this a lot for the companies at the stages that we tend to work with them at, where as they're building things out and they're bringing on marketing and outsourcing marketing, they can close. So the people who are in charge of the company tend to be the ones, like, they're going to hire out SDR, right? They're going to hire out the people to go to the fucking networking meetings and the trade shows and all the shit they want to do, and then they want to come in the room at the end because that's what they're best at and close. But they don't necessarily inject themselves where you're talking about, which is, no, grab that lead, right? Like, it comes in from somewhere, like, generate a lead, and then you field like the first part of the process and see where the problem is there, not the end, and see if you can overcome everything by closing it one way or the other, but jump into the early and middle stage as soon as they come in, and then hand it off from there. They could definitely learn a lot from that, because it's a very different conversation than whoever makes it to the room that you're in.
And if people look at the data across their sources and across their reps, the thing that I've found, and I think that you're going to find in your company if you look at the data too, is that the quality of the lead matters more to the outcome of close one versus the quality of the rep, which is crazy. I recognized this when I started sending high intent demo requests to somebody that had been on our company for 7 days and was closing deals super fast.
Yeah.
Like, he didn't know anything about our customer, the emergency medicine physician, and he's closing deals. It's because that person was marketed to and was already done buying.
Yeah, they're ready, right? They're ready. So you can go through the basics. You don't need someone who's going to come in and try to work them over.
And so, like, companies that don't do a good amount of marketing, whether that's in paid or organic, or my view, some combination of the two, they don't do those things, then they really lean on sales performance.
Yeah.
Okay. It's way easier in my mind to get all that stuff done up front, and then let people come to you when they're ready to buy. And so and then when we start talking about this thing, people are like, yeah, that sounds great in theory, but they don't know how to get it done. And so Getting it done is actually quite simple, and I'm happy to go into that a little bit if we have enough time for the
Do it.
podcast. You let me know.
Run right into it. Let's just keep going.
Yeah.
How do you get it done?
The first step is changing the metrics. And so if you don't change your metrics, none of the following steps can happen. And this is, you have a wide variety of an audience. So I'm speaking in the world of B2B SaaS, but other people in different B2B businesses might or might not have the same metrics depending on where they are on the scale and different things like that. Mm-hmm. But typically the metric is number of leads and a cost per lead, like you had mentioned above. So that seems pretty consistent. Those are the marketing metrics, and the numbers are so high that the cost per lead must be super low. Mm-hmm. And when I see a low cost per lead, I most often see following that very terrible conversion rates, right? And so you could go and look at your data, and you could basically figure out that this isn't the right way to do it. If you're able to change the metrics, then you need to focus on the intent. And so we have the metrics were eliminated, the volume is lower, we might pay more per lead, but we're going to have, at some of the companies we work with, they have 40 to 100 times better conversion rates on the leads that we focus on versus the leads that they've been focusing on before. That is dramatic.
Yeah.
And then change your intent that I'm trying to help people, and I don't need them as a lead right this second, which then changes your behavior. It changes your content creation. It changes how important it is that you actually understand your customers, not just build an ebook and put it behind a form so that you can get the contact information, whether or not the ebook actually helps someone. When you get rid of the form, the ebook better be good or no one's going to read it. And the point of the ebook in that point is to change someone's perception, not to collect their email address. And so it changes the idea of what you actually create, which I think is why my content works so much. Because I'm not trying to get any leads out of this stuff. Right. And so once you change your intent, then you need to focus on, and you understand your customers, then you need to focus on, how do I effectively communicate with them? People are going to immediately tune you out when everyone will hear what I'm saying and listen. When people are like, we got, post on LinkedIn, we got this new product rolling out, everyone's going to love it, come sign up for my demo, link in the comments. Like, nobody wants that, right? And so in order to actually they're going to scroll right by you. In order to command attention, you need to be able to give them something that is worth consuming for two minutes, which oftentimes has nothing to do with your product, which then creates trust, it creates credibility, it creates affinity. And then if the content actually helps change people's perception, it creates like problem awareness, subconscious product consideration, and future sales. And so those are some of the things that I look at. But ultimately, in its simplest form, it comes down to, can you communicate with people that can buy from you? And what I find is that a lot of people struggle to do that. As it seems like a simple statement, but it's actually really challenging. Yeah.
Yeah, easier said than done, perhaps. And now let me ask you this about the communicating, because some of what you said, like you just said, it sounds kind of simple. And people, if you're coming from a pure marketing or you're a content marketer or something, it's like, well, yes. And that's what I've been saying, right? Is like, you create content that provides value, builds trust. You're the trusted advisor. So when they need something, and then when they need to get approval for that kind of a plan, like, then there's a problem, right? So what about the internal communication? Because obviously, companies can bring you in, from the outside, but for people who are doing it from the inside, what is there to communicate to the people who are the ultimate decision makers, who are in these 20-year-old sales-driven B2B kind of organizations? Like, how do you get the point across to get buy-in internally for this kind of a plan? Because sometimes it doesn't happen overnight. Right. That doesn't necessarily start yielding the next day. And in a pandemic, people are getting crushed and they want sales. So how do you communicate what you're saying inside so that people buy in long enough to see the results?
Yeah. So there was a lot of stuff in there. So one of the first things is, oftentimes executives hire me just to give them a permission to do the things that they want to do already. It's really interesting. I just they see all the things, whether they hear about them from me or they just see them because they're smart and they notice them in the business, and then they somehow stumble upon me, and then they basically look for me to give them permission to do the things that they want to do anyway.
Yeah.
And so I think that one is really interesting because there's a fear of the unknown
Right.
Inside of companies that become very there's so much in this machine that they become very risk averse, and they become like almost stuck to the machine, whether or not the machine actually does anything anymore. Right.
Yeah.
So that's one. How do you get permission to do this if you're the 20-some-year-old marketer? I was the 26-year-old marketer that was trying to figure out how to do this inside of a venture-funded company that was sales-driven. The CEO was a salesperson through and through. And the way that I figured it out is a couple things. And the caveat I'll put on this, it as a marketer that actually has the skills, it is way easier to find a CEO that believes in marketing and just go and work for them versus trying to fight. And having been through this at multiple companies, it would be a lot easier for you to just go and find a CEO that believes in marketing. Because then you don't have to go through this process every single time you want to do something. You just go and do it.
Yeah.
And so that's the caveat, but I've been through it, so I'll share some tips. Number one, people aren't going to like this, but you're going to have to potentially communicate in ways that could lead to you getting fired. I can't tell you how many times I almost got fired in this company. It's just because I believed so much in what we were doing, and I believed so much in how much better it would move the needle for the business, and I had over time a lot of results that proved that.
Yeah.
And however, working painfully hard to convince people of things that they don't want to be convinced is one, really hard, and oftentimes doesn't lead you to the outcome that you want. Right. And so that's kind of one thing, is you're going to have to, if you're not willing to do that, if you don't believe in it enough, it's not going to happen. At least in my experience. The next thing is you got to frame it up. And if the person's a salesperson, you got to frame it up in metrics that matter to those people. Right. And so the way that I framed it up is qualified pipeline and revenue and sales cycle length compared to the other means of getting revenue inside of the company, and showing them side by side. Look, I know that we have $19 million invested in our field sales team. Here's how much it's costing us to get a new customer over there. And here's how much it's costing over here. This one feels a lot lower to me. What do you think? Like, I'm not saying get rid of the sales reps, but there's a big difference here. If we didn't do this stuff, then we're going to have a higher cost of acquisition and we're going to grow slower.
Yeah.
And so having a black and white business conversation, if you have the chops to do that, is probably the easiest way. And then the last thing, and I kind of mentioned this at the front, but if you feel very good about the things that you're doing and you feel very good about the results that it's impacting, and you're not able to get it done in your company, there are tons of companies that want you in their company. For demand, people that actually know demand, the game has changed. We are in a candidate driven market because the candidate pool that knows what they're doing is incredibly small. And so if you have the skills, don't feel like you necessarily need the job you have right now. Because a lot of companies, the need for this has grown a lot over the past 12 months, and it's going to continue to grow.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great rundown. Find someone who actually is looking for what you're doing, and know how to speak in other people's language so that you can sell your case. And I know that you personally then did a lot of work on your own time to prove the case, right? You got to do the job you have and then prove your case with results along the side if need be.
And it's to be honest, it's the reason that I have a company now. You know what I mean? Like, and so when I say think long term in terms of your like demand program, but at 25 years old, I was thinking long term too. Right. Like, I knew that I was going to start a company before I was 30. I knew that I wasn't ready at that time. I didn't know what the company was going to be, but I knew I didn't have the skills and I wasn't ready. So I did a lot of things to try and figure out what are the things that people need. Yeah. And just saw and I've told this story a couple of times, but I just find it really fascinating, is that company, I was literally putting millions of dollars in pipeline and more than $1 million in revenue for this $35-40 million ARR company with my demand program with like 2 people and a little bit of a budget. And the CEO wants to he offers me a sales job. And I was just like, it's clear that this is not the place for me. But, and it was also just like, at that point it was clear that my impact in this role was much dramatically stronger from a business standpoint than being an individual contributor sales rep or even a sales manager for that matter. And so I just, in my gut, knew that I needed to stay the course here.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Cool. So I'm going to go off in a little bit different direction for like this last bit here.
Yeah. Now that you've had a couple sips of that bourbon, you're ready to get off the script.
I'm going to go off in a lot of different directions. You just sit back and relax. I got this, Chris. But no, because you just mentioned like finally splitting off, right? And you and I, we did some events at the beginning of all this pandemic stuff just to give some people some ideas, some resources, and you ended up bootstrapping a whole bunch of content mechanisms that you're still utilizing, right? So you started this, kind of just showing up, having a Zoom meeting, which turns into a podcast, which turns into, an actual like well-attended thing. You're generating business off this. And so you went from the striking out, on your own to building something in kind of a crazy environment, but where your services are, some of us are more in demand than we were otherwise, right? Which is nice. And now you've got a company, you've got employees, you've been hiring, you've been growing internally. So now as an actual someone who's running a business, right? Someone who's in a business, which is very different than being out on your own, which is very different from being an employee. Looking back, despite how well everything's gone and all like the wins, what's one thing that you would have done differently in the last year to 2 years, knowing what you know now about actually running a business with a team? And take a second to think if you need to.
I mean, this one's, I did it in August of 2020, but I should have done it sooner, which is hire a COO. And maybe it wasn't financially feasible, but I let me answer it more simply, because COO was one example, but it's basically identify the things that I am not good at or that I don't like to do, which I honestly are usually one and the same. And then hire really strong people to do those things, because making some of those hires has dramatically changed the course of the growth trajectory of the business. And so I think that requires some, and you're always learning more about yourself as you go through things. And so some of that stuff's going to happen, but just like reflecting and thinking like, why don't I like this thing? Why don't I like managing these 7 people? Why don't I like, being, whatever the things are, recognizing that, admitting it to yourself, and then taking accountability to go and find a different solution. I think is one of the main learnings that I had if we look back 12 months.
Okay. Nice. I like that one. Last thing, and this is very open. So number 1, tell us where we can find you, where we can find your company, all that kind of fun stuff. And then open ending for you. One message you want to leave people with, the key message of the week, promo, shout out, whatever you want to do. How do you want to wrap this up?
Yeah. So, LinkedIn, Chris Walker, I post content there almost every day. A lot of people enjoy it. A lot of people get value out of it. And then those things on LinkedIn just become micro versions of what we use on a podcast. And so the State of Demand Gen podcast, you can find that on Apple or Spotify or any other place where podcast exists. Again, a lot of awesome feedback on that from, solopreneurs to, CMOs of B2B SaaS companies and a lot of things in between. And so if you're interested in some of the things that we talked about, would encourage you to check a couple of those things out. What was the last thing?
Whatever you want to say
the message.
To wrap this up.
Yeah. So the message I want to leave people with is, and I had a story, so I'll actually that we didn't get to. So I'll tell a quick story and then I'll explain my final point. And so the point here is that communicating effectively with your customers is the most important thing in your business right now, aside from the quality of your product. And so if you can admit or get over that hump, I'm going to tell you a little story. So, and about communicating effectively. And so, in companies I've worked for in the past, in one specific example, we had a major clinical trial that was published, and we decided the best way to do it was to create a press release. So we were going to create a press release and we were going to put it out on the wire, and we did that. And 3 days later, I tracked and we had, whatever the amount of hits were, and no increase in volume of demo requests or whatever. And then I took the exact same press release and I put it on our blog, and I ran Facebook and LinkedIn ads targeted at the job titles at the companies of the people that were going to guarantee delivery, and drove the most pipeline in the next 30 days that the company had ever seen. That is the difference between that. It's both communication, two different forms of distribution, and deciding how to use them effectively. Same piece of content, same information, just deliver it in two separate ways. And so I want people to really think about the effectiveness of their communication when measured against, did somebody consume it and did we change their perception? And so I think that's critically important. I think it's a really interesting story, and people can go through and think, the trade show. Is the trade show worth our, I know they're not happening right now. You could go to the virtual event. Is that worth the cost of what we're paying, or could we do something more effectively in a different way? The SDR resources that are sending emails, delivering content, could that be whatever it is? It's just thinking about how are we going to communicate effectively once we recognize that it's the most important thing we can do.
Nice.
That's a good story. That was a good one. I never mentioned that before.
Nice. Exclusive stories.
You heard it here on Beers and BizDev, or whatever this one's called.
Brews and BizDev. Exactly. Yes, or whatever. Well, I mean, we went to booze instead, so it's booze and just me. So that's cool. All right, man. Well, I'm going to let you get on because I know you've got your own podcast, coming up here pretty soon. So I'll let you get to it. I appreciate the time as always, and congratulations on all the growth. You put out great stuff. I love tracking it, and it's good to see you halfway through, or whatever it is, the pandemic, and the things are going so well, bud. So I appreciate it. Thanks for coming out.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me, and let's get something, second or third quarter, a little later in the day, and I'll have a whiskey with you.
Sounds good. Yeah. We'll do it at a time that works.
Awesome. Catch you later, Paul.
Thanks, bud.
See you, man. Bye.
Yeah. Brews and BizDev is hosted by Paul Greiner and produced by Renoun Creative. Check us out at renowncreative.com. Are you fucking kidding me?